another video today. So today's video is all about exception handling in Excel automation, or we can say in Power Automate. So in previous video we have seen how can we apply filter, how can we perform different operations in Excel using the basic Excel actions, right? So in today's video we will be doing exception handling in Power Automate. How can we do exceptions handling in Power Automate, right? So let this flow be open. Yeah, so this is our flow which we have made in the previous video, right? So in Power Automate, basically exceptions can be handled in two ways, right? One is for the group of actions. So for these whole actions we can handle exception for all these actions. We can do a single block exception handling, and second is we have a for each stage we have exception handling. Let's say we want to handle exception for this, right? Launch Excel. So if you go to on error, we have a exception handling for each stage which we can do, right? So if let's say that I want to handle exception for this launch Excel, let's say that my launch Excel does not works for some reason xyz, that Excel is corrupted, or it is not available, we have to retry it. So in that case, if I double click and go to the error option, and there is a retry policy, right, where we can retry this action, and I can define that how many times this action would be retried if it fails. So let's say that I show that it should retry 3 times after interval of 5 seconds, right? So this means that if this launch Excel fails, then it will retry 3 times more within an interval of, not within an interval, after an interval of 5. So it fails, it will wait for 5 seconds, then a retry second, it will wait for 5 seconds, and then it will retry, it will wait for 5 seconds. So this is how this will retry. Now if I come down, then here we have continue flow run and throw error. So let's say that after retry also this does not work and continue to throw error, the launch Excel, then it will come below, right? It will go to all errors. If there is any rule defined, yes or no, we'll talk about these rule defines in later part of the video. Then it will come in here, right? So if there is a throw error, then this will pop out the error, right? And it will look if there is any block available or not. I'll show you what block, how block works. And then there is a continue flow run. If this is checked, then it will check go to next action. If go to next action is there, then even if it fails, it will come to next stage, right? And if I select repeat action, then it will repeat this action, but it is not defined here that how many times it will repeat this action. So if you select this repeat action, it will retry this infinite number of times even if it fails. So it is, I will not recommend this to use the repeat action. There are some logics we have to apply when do we have to use this repeat action, because if you use this repeat action, the Power Automate will repeat it infinite number of times, and it is, I will not recommend it, right? And then we have a go to statement. Go to statement is basically, let's say your launch Excel fails, right, and you want to send an email. So you define a label, you define a go to statement that okay, go to this you can define that go to this subflow and throw an email that okay, the launch Excel has failed, please check the files, right? So this is stage, this is basically, so this exception handling basically applies to each stage. Now if I go to the block, so I select a block, or I can just search error, right, on block error. So if I select this, then I can define any name in this. Let's say I define that preparing output exception block, like, right, the name should be defined in such a way that it is easily understandable, right? Save, and there is an end statement in here. So what does it do is, let's say I just pulled it launch Excel in here and get all worksheet in here, right? So now in the launch Excel, if there is any error defined, right, and the error, the rule defined is throw error, then what this will do is this error is thrown, this error is popped out, and this error will come on the on block, right? It will get caught here, right? And then in this, then the bot will check if there are any rules defined in this block error, right? So these are the rules defined. You can just throw error. So if you throw error, it will again pop out, right? And this basically this flow is called here, it will come here and it will check if there is any block available here or not. If not available, then the flow will terminate, right? So it comes in this block and it will see if there are any rules defined or not, right? So if you mention that go to end of the block, right? So and if there is an exception, so it will run this, and in this the rule is defined as go to end of the block, so it directly will come here, right? And if you have defined go to beginning of the block, right, so this error throws exception, it comes here and then it will start from the beginning, so it will again go to launch excel, right? Now go to next action. What go to next action is, let's say that the error comes in this launch excel and the rule defined in on block error is go to next action, so it will skip this and it will come here, right? Now repeat action is basically same, where it will repeat the stage which has the exception, but I recommend not to use this until and unless you know how to handle errors, right? Because in using this action it will be an infinite loop if there is any error. Right, I have seen many developers doing this mistake using this repeat action. They think that the automation will always work. Let's say even if it's launch excel, they think that okay, launch excel will never fail. Even if it fails, let's use repeat action, and I have seen the automation stuck in infinite loop and it can go into days and weeks, right? So I'll recommend, I'll show you how to use this repeat action. Now the last is go to label. Since there are no labels as such, go to label is basically it will throw the exception to that label. It's a go to statement. We'll learn how can we use this go to label statement, right? So let me just delete this block for now and let's see how can we do exception handling for each stage, right? So if I go to my main and in the assign variables, basically in assign variables we are not required to do any exception handling, but it is always recommended. We don't know what could go wrong, right? So I'll recommend if in assign variables you can have a on block error, so that if there is any unexpected or logical exceptions, that will also be get caught, right? So for each stage, let's start with launch excel. Let's say that your launch excel fails, right? And it can be resolved by retrying it, right? So let's say it can be resolved by retrying it. So I'll just use the fixed retry and I'll just use only one time after an interval of 3, right? So if you see this uh, stage, it means that exception handling is being done on that particular stage. I hover over this, it will tell you what actions are being defined, right? So it is a retry action one time every 3 seconds, right? Okay, so let's see how does this one works. So on error we have the throw error, right? So if I let's deliberately create an exception. Let me delete this h from the path and a breakpoint on this launch excel, and let me just quickly run it so that it will throw an exception, and let's see how this will be handled. Okay, so we have on the launch excel, now it is paused because of the breakpoint. Now I click run next action, right? So if you see in below, it is stepping, right? It is retrying it. See it is running, it is retrying this one. Okay, it has retried it, and now if I run next action, see it has retried one time and then it has thrown the exception that okay, let's see the full exception. If you click on this, so what it say is failed to open excel document, this file related error. It has also given me the subflow name where this exception has occurred. It has also given me the action name where this action has, or where this exception has occurred. It has also given me the line where this exception has occurred. We can calculate, or we can have a variable where we can define that okay, this subflow has this exception, right? And it has given me some recommendations also that whether you can check, right? And these are the other details from the exception which has occurred, right? So now okay, now let's say I have retried it. Now let's say that my exception, I know that it is possible that the exception could occur in launch excel and it could be retried if I kill and launch it again, right? So how can we achieve that one? So for that one, we have different people can have a different developer can have different logics. I'll tell you how I will do it, right? So for this, let's say that if any exception occur, it should kill excel and then launch it again, right? For that, let me just quickly define a subflow here to retry this launch, right? So I will just retry logic, okay, and then in the assigning variables, I'll just have two variables, right, which will, let me define it with counter, right, and its value would be 1, and then I will define a max retry and it would be 3, right? So why I have defined these variable is a launch. If the launch fails, so I'll apply a logic that it should kill excel, right, and then it should retry, so counter would be 1. Now if again fails, counter would be 2. If it will kill again, right, if it fails again, then counter would be 3, and if kills and launches again, and if the counter is 4, then it should throw exception saying that okay, we have retried 3 times but it still fails, right? So let me just open a blank excel for in order to use the kill action, right? Let me just open a blank excel. Okay, now if I go to my preparing output, I'll just have a retry logic here. Okay, now here I will define what actions I need to perform. So terminate, so I will define that, okay, you can, so excel just, so what this action will do is it will terminate the excel or it will kill the excel, right? And this exception, this stage, sorry, will throw exception if the excel is not opened or if there is no instance of excel. For example, if I run it here, I have an excel opened here, see, so currently that is being running and it has killed the excel. Now if I run it again, okay, it is not throwing any exception. Okay, that's fine, but even if this stage throws exception, I don't want it to fail. I'll just use that, okay, if it, even if it fails, then it should go to the next action, right? Now I'll use a if to increase the counter. So now if counter is greater than the max retry, right, let's just save it, then it should, or I can say then it should stop the flow, right? So stop flow with an error message, and we will capture the error message also, right? So it can't be empty. Let's have a let's create a variable, or let's create a subflow to capture the exception, right? So I'll create, and I'll just rename it as get exception details, right? In order to get the exception, we have a stage which is get last error, so it will give you the last error details. For example, these are the details, if you see, so this last error will give us all the details in the exception. Okay, so now if I go in my preparing output, okay, oh sorry, okay, now I go to my retry logic. So I have defined that, okay, if after 3 retries, if even if it fails, then it should stop the flow, and it should stop the flow with the last error, right? So what is the last error, and you can have all the details in here. For example, on which action it fails, what is the action name, what are the error details, what is the location, what is the actual message that we are getting, right? For now I'll just give error details. We'll see in detail what all other actions mean in the last error. Okay, let me save this. Now I go to my prepare output and I open on error details. Here I'll choose none, and in the rules section I'll define a new rule, set variable. What I'll do is I'll increase the counter from here, right? So counter right? And again counter here, right? So plus one, sorry, plus one here, and then I will have a new rule. I'll have a new subflow being run, which is a get exception detail, right? And then I will have a new subflow run where I will have a retry logic. Okay, and I can use repeat action. Now this repeat action will have a limit, right? So I have done an exception handling. Let's see how it works in the real time. Let me just have a run over it. Let me just have a breakpoint here and into the main. Let's just run it. Okay, so currently it is as launch Excel. I'll just run next action, and if you see, it is currently stepping and it is paused, right? And then see, now in that what I have defined is, first step I have defined is the counter, to increase the counter variable, and counter becomes 2, right? And then next subflow was to capture the error, right? It has captured the error. Let's say what is in the last error. If you see, the error is this. So these are all the actions are defined in this last error. So if you see, the error message is that this failed to open this workbook, right? Now our next rule in the exception handling was to run the retry logic, right? So it will terminate and it will check. Okay, it is the counter is still smaller, right? It is 2 and not more than 3, right? So it will again retry this action, right? It has increased the counter to 3. If you see, it will capture the last error, terminate the process, check. Okay, it is still not greater. Now okay, and if I see, okay, now it is 4, and it will check, okay, that it has retried 3 times, and it will throw the error that okay, there is some exception that failed to open Excel document, right? So what we can do here, or what we usually do here is, I'll just use a message box and not the email. Just you can just log a message, right? That so that it will be in the into the flow that okay, yes, there is an error. So what you can do is, you can have last error, then you can have the error detail, right? And error, let's just save. Okay, so what it will do is, you can use, we usually use a send email, or we inform the customer that okay, there is some error, or we inform the operation that okay, there is some error, that your exception, that your flow has been failed due to this xyz reason, right? So I'll just log error so that it will be logged and it will be easy for the developer to debug, right? So what I have done is, it will just simply log the error details into the logs, right? Now this is all about how can we handle exception on the stage wise, right? So if I go, this is all the logic I have defined. Now if I have used throw error, right? If I have used throw error, what it would have done, let's see, I have used throw error. So what it would have done is, it would first it would have first increased the counter, because what rules I have defined is to increase the counter. Then it will run the exception detail, and then it will run the retry logic, but it will not repeat that action. It will just throw the error that okay, this has failed, and increase the counter. Okay, now if I have used go to next action, it has increased the counter. It will get the exception details, and then it will move to the this second, right? So if I'll use go to next action, let's say, and I'll run it again, right? So if I run next action, right, it has paused, it get the last error, terminates, checks the counter, and see, it has came to the next step. And if I run this next step, it will obviously fail, right? Because there is some error, the instance is not available, and since there is no exception handling done, so if there is no exception handling done, the define would be throw error simply. And since there are no rules defined, it will throw the error, right? So this is how we can handle the exceptions for each of the stages. Now the one left is go to level. We'll have I'll explain go to level in the next in upcoming part of the video. Now we will talk about the on block error, which is basically a try catch error. If you have done any coding, if you have written any code, then you will understand this easily, but if you have not done, then I'll be explaining how the on block error works. So the first step in on block error is you give it a definite name, right, so that it can be easily understandable of whoever is handling your code. So if you are doing exception handling on preparing output on the subflow as preparing output, then you should name it as preparing output exception block, right, and you click save, right. So this end I will just pull it to the last so that its region is defined, right. So okay, so now if you see its region is defined, that there are 15 actions inside it, right. So let's say what on block error does is, if there is any exception in any of these actions, right, in any of these actions, what this will do is the exception will be thrown, right. I will just show you a diagram. So let's say these are your excel actions, so 1 2 3 4, and this is the block, right. So if there is any exception in any of these four blocks, this is your on block error, right. Recover is your on block error, it will be caught here, right, and resume is it will kill the exception. So similarly, if you see in the Power Automate, any exception occurred in these actions, inside these actions, these will be caught here, and rules defined in these blocks are being run, right. So how do we handle exception, or how the developer developing the code handle exception in Power Automate or on block error is, what they usually do is they either use this go to beginning of the block and retry these course of action 3 times, right. I'll be doing the same, but there can be different logics used by different people how they retry logic. I believe in reusing the code as much as possible, so I'll be using my retry logic in here. This logic I'll be reusing this. So how I can use this one is, so I go here, right, and I will define the same rules which I have defined in this my launch excel process, right. So what I will do is, first I go to the retry logic. I will just uh, copy this, create a new flow, and I will just use kill process so that I can reuse it as much as possible. I will just have this here, right, and then I will go to my prepare output, and on the on block error, first thing I will define is the counter. So these are the same thing which are defined in the Excel part, so I'll do this quickly. So in the preparing output, I have just defined these steps again, where I've increased the counter, get the exception details. Only a subflow that I have created is kill process, which I have created separately, right. If kill process is not required, you can delete it, and then retry logic, and I have used go to beginning of the block, right. Or you can use repeat action, okay, and let's just save. Okay, so what this block will do here is, if there is any exception, the exception will be caught by this block, right, and then it will increase the counter and retry. Now one thing that now I can reuse this block anywhere I want, right. I do not have to define exception handling logic separately on every page. I can just reuse this block anywhere. Only thing I need to do is, I'll just have a variable which is set variable, and I can just have this defined as 0 or 1, whatever I want, whenever this block is being called. Before that, I can have this counter 1, because every time there is an exception, the counter will be increased, so I'll have to reinitialize that counter in order to do that. So first step will be uh, to increase or to reinitialize the counter variable, right. So let me just have a run it, and let's see how this one runs and how the exception will be handled, right. So I'll just run it from here. Okay, so I'll go to next action, since this we have already seen. right? So let me run it, and okay. Okay, so it comes to next action. Let me just use to throw error, and save. Also, I'll just remove all the exception handling now, since we have defined the exception handling into our on block, right? So now let me just have a run. Now if you see, I go to launch Excel, and it has thrown the exception. That's why if you see, it is now on block error. Now if I run it, it will get the last error, terminate the Excel process, check the counters. Okay, if it is greater than 3, then it will stop the process, else it will just retry again. Right, I'll just run it by clicking run. See, it comes here again, and this time counter is 3, it will increase to 4, and this will see, the process will be now, it has logged the details, and it will stop the process with the error what we have defined, or the last error we have defined in the stop flow process, right? So this is how we can do exception handling, right? This is how we can handle exceptions in the on block error. I can also, so sometimes what we require is, sometimes we require to repeat the action, or sometimes we require to go to label, or sometimes we require to go to the end of the block. So if I use this go to end of the block, what this will do is, instead of coming to the beginning of the block, it will go to the end of the block. So let me just try running it from here, right? And I run the launch Excel, and since this will throw error, and in this the rules are defined that it will terminate, it will check, and then the rule defined is go to end. So it has gone to the end, that okay, this should go to the end, and we can define that okay. So there are some automations in which we can, if there is any exception in some of the workflow, we should have to go to the next step, right? There are some automations where if some subflow fails, then we have to move to the next flow. So on those occasions, we can use okay, go to the end of the block and retry the next actions, skip that actions, right? So in those cases, we use go to end of the block. Now let's talk about labels, exception handling in labels, right? So first of all, let me, to explain the labels, let me have the on block, right? Okay, so loop uh, exception block, always give a name that is easily understandable, right? In order to explain label, I have just used this block. I'll just have this here. Okay, so let's say that what I want to do is, my Excel is running on 100 items or 1000 items, and let's say if flow my flow fails at the 99 items out of 100, I don't want to retry it, right? I just want that my automation will save the 99 items, right? I just want that. So in order to achieve that, I can use label, right? You can use label in any of your scenario. I'll just explain you how we can use it, right? So I will define the label here. I will just name it loop next or loop end, right? Okay, and in the exception handling, I will just define that okay, if there is any exception, right? If there is any exception inside these activities or inside my loop, in any of the iteration, xyz iteration, it should go to the loop, it should go to label here. So let's say my loop is running, right, and I have exception in copy cells on the third iteration, right? So what I want, or what customer want, is it should not fail, or it should not retry it, right? What it should do is, it should come here, and it will close the Excel, or it will save that data what is currently available. So that's where our label or go to statement comes into picture. So if there is any exception, I have defined that okay, this would come into the come to my next label. If there is any exception here, close the Excel and save the Excel, right? So this is how we can use labels in here, right? And so there are also a question from someone that if, let's say, my in this loop, let's say my item failed at third attempt and I want to go to the next loop, right? So in order to achieve that, what I can do is, in the on block error, I can just use go to end of the block, right? This is the question from one of the person, that if there is an exception in the any of the iteration, it should go to the next iteration instead of throwing the error. So what I have done is go to the end of the block, and what this automation will do now is, if there isn't any exception here, it will go here and it will go here and it will continue to the next iteration, right? So this is how you can go to the next iteration using the exception handling, right? So I'll just delete this one. So this is how we can handle exception. Now I will handle this exception on each of the page similarly. First, let me just use a region is basically where I can close a set of actions inside a region. It is nothing but just to close the group of actions. I can give the name as preparing output region. I'll just close all my actions inside that region so that it will be easily understandable. Okay, now what I will do quickly is I will just copy each of these actions and I will use them here, right? Also, obviously you can have your own logics. Let me know in the comment section below what logics have you used to handle the exception. I have used this one. I'll just rename this one. Don't forget to rename all of your on block errors. I'll just rename it to a signing category, and it should be go to beginning of the block, right? Similarly in this also, it should be go to beginning of the block, right? And similarly we can handle these exceptions inside the create. Okay, okay, this has also been copied. Let me just delete the inside actions. Okay, so your exception handling is done. Let me rename it as create separate sheet exception block. Go to beginning of the block, right? We are not required to handle exception and exception handling and retry logic. It should remain as it is. In kill process, we should always have an on block error to go to next action so that this will not fail. Or we can also have a retry in here, where if it is not killed in first time, it should retry, give it a retry, right? And then onto the main, we always should have an exception handling block, right? So it is main block, right? So I have handled exception, and in this, what I will define is I will just run a subflow called as the get exception details, right? And I want to terminate this flow because obviously it should show as a terminated, it should show as a terminate into the my control room or into my Power Automate cloud, that okay, this flow has failed, and so that the support team or the developer can look that okay, this failed is because of this reason. I'll just give get exception details so that all the details will be there, or I can use a log message so that it is from the logs it is evident that okay, there is something failed. You can use log message, always use log message, so that it will be very easy when you see into the logs that okay, this flow has gone into the exception handling and it has failed, right? So this is how you do exception handling in the Power Automate, right? Let me know in the comment section below how you have done exception handling into your flow, right? Till then, bye, see you in the next video. Happy automation. Bye.